So we got Joe Gentry again this morning, one of our regular performers, who's going to delve into the arcana of the big beautiful bill and economics and anything else he cares to talk about, or anything we want him to talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good morning. I am Joe Gentry. A little background. I worked for 20 years in manufacturing, 10 years in mining, and then almost 20 years in banking, all for-profit, conservative-driven businesses. In the last 6 years, I've worked for the United Way here in Alpena, Northeast Michigan, a liberal social human services organization. So I see both sides of what's happening today. From my own perspective, when I was teaching economics here at the college as an adjunct, I literally took the conservative pathway, actually used Milton Friedman's free to choose program that ran on public television as a basis for my class. So you get an idea where I'm coming from. I want to try and be, I tell you that because I want to be objective. I have my own personal views, but my intent this morning is to be objective. First, I want to talk a little bit about Project 2025 to give you some background that might help you understand the current administration's policies and programs. I want to then talk about the big, beautiful bill that was passed on July 4th by President Trump. And then I want to talk about what our state Republicans recently did in their last minute budget. What we almost had an hour shutdown of the state government in October. They came up with a new budget. Then the House Appropriation Committee, 2 days before Christmas, took $645 million of funding and said, we're not funding it, even though it had been approved by both the House and the Senate and signed by the governor. And if you read yesterday's paper, Nessel took that whole thing to court saying it's unconstitutional. So they all have impact on what we're doing and how it affects us today. So first of all, I want to talk about Project 25. My interest in Project 25 was when Trump was on the campaign trail, denying he had anything to do with it. He didn't even read it, didn't know what it was about, but yet its author was his first term's director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought. And he was reappointed to that same position in his second term. So Russell Vought was a big advocate of the Project 2025. And if you haven't read that book or that policy manual, I suggest you at least go find some, cliff notes on it. I'll talk a little bit about what it says today, because it'll give you an idea of where the Trump administration is coming from. They came out with a book. It's been around since 2022, Project 2025. It's sponsored by the Heritage Foundation, but they came out with a manual in 2023. It's called The Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. And it was a game plan for the next conservative president that takes office. President Trump, 2024. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to read you something that you get an idea of the whole overtone of Project 225. This is a quote from the lead-in to the manual for the Mandate for Leadership. The long march of cultural Marxism through our institutions has come to pass. The federal government is a behemoth, weaponized against American citizens and conservative values, with freedom and liberty under siege as never before. So the Mandate for Leadership has as its goals, number one, restore the family as a centerpiece of American life, dismantle the administrative state, defend the nation's sovereignty and borders, and secure God-given individual rights to live freely. So that's just the mission statement of Project 25. So if you go through the 920 pages of the document, you can get a gist of exactly what they're espousing. One, replace all federal civil service workers by people loyal to the next conservative president. The actual Russell Vought came up with this thing called Form F that every civil servant would have to complete. They would then go into the presidential database as either being in favor of the president or not in favor of the president. Currently, President Trump has 22,000 people that are in his database that completed the form favorably. One of the big questions is name one person that you admire the most in our country. So anyway, it's interesting form. Number two, they take partisan control of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Department of Commerce, and the Federal Trade Commission. They all should be eliminated and controlled in one institution and directly under presidential control. Dismantle the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Education. These come right from their documents. Reduce all environmental regulations. Realign the National Institution of Health with conservative priorities. Reduce taxes on corporations from 21% to 18%. Reduce the capital gains tax from 20% to 15%, and institute a flat tax rate on all individuals. 15% on anybody making under the Social Security wage base of $168,000, and then 30% tax rate on anybody over that Social Security tax base. And then eventually they want to eliminate income taxes and move to a national consumption tax, like a national sales tax. Cut Medicare, cut Medicaid. Reverse all of Joe Biden's policies as possible. Ban for pornography. Remove legal protections against anti-LGBT discrimination. So all of your LGBT people would have no protection under the law. And DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Eliminate woke propaganda in public schools. Elevate parental choice and parents' rights. Let Title I of elementary and secondary education expire. That would eliminate about $18 billion in federal funds to low-income schools. Institute school vouchers and cuts to free school meals and Head Start. Do not forgive student loans. Education is a private good, not a public good. Rescind Title IX policies under the Bidens, from Joe Biden. And I know being on a college board, we've had to adjust our Title IX language. When Joe Biden came in, he changed President Trump's Title IX language. Now we probably have to go back to the old Title IX language. Have DOJ, the Department of Justice, prosecute anti-white racism. Eradicate climate change references from absolutely everywhere. Abolish the National Oceanic, the NOA, which would be affected here in Alpena. They want to eliminate it. They say the NOA is responsible for all this climate change activity. And if we eliminate it, then we can go back to more drilling, more gas, and more oil exploration. They're under the Inflation Reduction Act under Joe Biden. There was a loan budget of $400 billion to pursue climate change stuff. They want it eliminated. And then mass deportation of illegal immigrants. And then enact laws, criminalize the sending and receiving of abortion and birth control medications, and eliminate coverage of emergency contraception. Install what is called the unitary executive theory. And this means the executive branch under the president has complete control. An example, domestic and military involvement in Washington, D.C. or Minneapolis or wherever, it would give the president control to call in domestic military to control stuff that's going on our ground. All of those agencies that were mentioned, like the DOJ, the FBI, the Federal Trade Commission, they would come under direct control of the president, not legislative control, but president. That is the theory behind unitary executive theory. dismantle the bureaucracy that is unaccountable and mostly liberal. And then the Federal Reserve should target only inflation and not unemployment. They blame the Federal Reserve for all these business cycle swings because they focus on both entities, inflation and on unemployment. They should just focus on inflation and eventually eliminate it. And the United States should go back on a commodity-based standard. The dollar used to be on the gold standard way back in the 60s, late 60s. They want to pick some commodity and go back to that standard. And then reconsider accommodations provided to journalists who are members of the White House press corps because they're mainly liberal, and defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NPR and PBS. Now, those come from not Trump's agenda. Those come from the Project 2025. Those are just some of the highlights. And I picked those ones out because you can see how our current administration, even the big, beautiful bill, includes some of these features. Critics of 2025 argue they undermine the rule of law, the separation of powers, and the separation of church and state and civil liberties. That's the argument against the stuff being proposed by 2025. Key personnel is Russell Vought. He is an advocate of all of the 2025 policy guidelines. He is the current manager and director of the Office of Management and Budget. He actually put together a 180-day playbook that has not become public. They've put in requests to make it public, but his 180-day playbook is based on many of the things that came out of Project 25. Most of Trump's staff were contributors to the Project 2025, even though he said he had no knowledge of it. And 2/3 of Trump's executive orders in his first 4 days directly came from policy statements from Project 225. So I give you that information as a basis. Hopefully it will pique your interest that you will do a little more research into 2025. So let's talk about the one big, beautiful bill that was passed on July 4th and what it includes. There's 3 items I want to talk about under our new big, beautiful bill: tax cuts and extensions, healthcare changes, and the social safety net changes. And some of you, this might impact you in a positive way, the tax cuts. Okay, tax cuts. Big item. First $25,000 of tips are tax deductible, up to filing joint, 150,000 income limit level. So if I'm a bartending and I'm getting tipped, those tips up to $25,000 I can deduct off my taxes. They identified tip jobs as food servers, beauticians, and some others, but primarily food servers, bartenders, and beauticians. $12,500 of overtime pay is tax deductible. Again, up to an income level of $150,000. So if you're working overtime and it's being taxed, guess what? It now becomes tax deductible up to those limits, up to $12,500. If your income falls below $150,000. Those are pretty substantial income increases for middle income wage earners. The standard deduction went up from $15,000 to $15,750, and that's $31,500 if you're married filing joint. And again, this standard deduction has a $150,000 income limit, and then after 2025, it's adjusted for inflation. It allows you to write off SALT, state and area local taxes. It raises the cap from $10,000 to $40,000, which says if you're paying property taxes, you can deduct them from your federal return, even if you're not an itemizer. So SALT is very important, particularly for people who have considerable wealth, because they are probably paying higher property taxes and higher local taxes. And especially because we put the limit from $10,000 to $40,000. And then it's increased 1% every year annually after that. Through 2028, seniors over the age of 65 can deduct $6,000. But it phases out at your income of a single person of $75,000 and filing joint of $150,000 of income. So if you're a senior and your income is joint for the year is less than $150,000, you get an additional $6,000 deduction from your taxes. The inheritance tax, they raised the limit to $15 million. So you can give your heirs up to $15 million in inheritance free. That was a significant jump. Child tax credit increased very small from $2,000 to $2,200, and it's going to be adjusted annually for inflation. Children under 8 get the Trump savings account. Starting July of this year, every child under 8 will get $1,000 into an account, into a savings account in their name. Be invested in mutual funds, or the details haven't come out. Under 8. Under 8. It's the Trump savings account. The federal government, it's similar to a 401k under 8. Born in certain years, so it's under 8. So if you have children or grandchildren under 8, they're going to get an account established by them. And as long as they have a social security number, they will get an account and $1,000 will go into it. You can contribute up to $5,000 a year into that account. Additionally, that account becomes accessible once they hit 18 years old.
Company or real wealthy people that donated money for that. Dell was.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not coming out of tax money.
It's federal government supported program. It's going to cost money to administer it. Believe me, it's not something.
No, but
yeah,
they did
the initial, yeah. So anyway, that's called the Trump account. There's a $5,000 tax credit for homeschool or private school families, providing they make less than 3 times the local median income. In Alpena, our median income is $46,000 plus. So if you're earning less than $139,000, you can take a $5,000 tax credit for if your kids go to Emmanuel or All Saints or you homeschool. Again, it's all about eliminating and putting in place a school voucher program. Okay? Non-itemized filers, and I encourage you to take advantage of this if you're not itemizing, you can deduct this year up to $1,000 in charity contributions or $2,000 as a family. If you're a non-itemizer. Right? That was eliminated. That's a new thing. So you could give to the United Way, you could give to your church, $1,000, it comes off the bottom of your taxes. It says cash. Well, you write a check. You can't do in kind. You can't transfer stock. You can't, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it has to be a cash donation. $1,000. Yeah. Yep. That doesn't count. And they tax private schools endowments that have student populations over 3,000. If the endowment has a fund of $500,000 to $750,000, there's a 1.4% tax. If the endowment has a fund of $750,000 to $2 million, there's a 4% tax. And if your endowment is over $2 million, there's an 8% annual tax on those endowment funds. So where does this ACC stand in? We have probably about 12 million in our foundation. We don't have 3,000 students. So we do not fall within that. So our endowment in the ACC Foundation wouldn't be taxed. But you look at a Michigan State, a U of M, Central, they all have endowments bigger than $2 million. And so they're going to be taxed at a rate of about 8%. Yes. And then extend the 2017 tax cuts that were implemented under President Trump. They were set to end at the end of 2025, extended them beyond 2025. So those are the tax policy changes, significant. And you can see some of where that tax policy is heading. Supporting private schools, encouraging a voucher system, those kinds of issues are in that tax policy. So let's talk about the ones that probably impact our population the most are the healthcare changes. Medicaid. Okay, it's projected 11.8 million people will lose their health insurance over the next decade. There's a 12% cut to Medicaid spending. I know there's clinics and hospitals that depend on Medicaid that are reducing staff and reducing services because they're losing revenue from the Medicaid cuts. The big one is the tax credits that were allowed under the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, did not get renewed. They did not get renewed. So that means that affected people who were using those tax credits to have affordable health insurance, their premiums are going to increase significantly. The governor put out yesterday, I believe, approximately how much has your monthly your premium changed compared to last year due to the non-renewal of these tax credits. 2% said it decreased, 16% said about the same, 34% said it increased by $100 to $250 a month, 24% said it increased by $250 to $500 a month, and 24% said it increased by $500 or more per month. I had a little statistic somewhere. I can find it. Typical. A typical 60-year-old couple making $85,000 will see a marketplace premium jump from $602 a month to $2,647, an annual increase of $24,500. That's the data that's being projected because of the non-renewal of the tax credits that were available under the Administrative Care Act. Those came in about 19 or 2000. Those were pandemic driven. So significant impact, this Medicaid insurance issue. And so who are mostly affected? Self-employed, small businesses, ranchers and farmers. Those are the biggest groups of people that are going to be impacted the most by this increase in health insurance. Now, the Republicans, when they didn't renew at the end of the year, said that they have a better form and we will address this in January, February. As of yet, it has not been addressed. It was the key issue in the government shutdown, SNAP and the healthcare premiums, okay? So it also, some things on the Medicaid, it increased or adds 80 hours per month of work requirements for Medicaid recipients that don't have children under 14 or they're disabled. So there were not really work, and those work requirements haven't really been clearly defined. It can be volunteer work, or it can be actual work. And there's still some negotiation because the Department of Health and Human Services is still trying to define. If you read, our Attorney General has filed suit against the Department of Health and Human Services about the definition of what are the true work requirements. Okay? So that's still in the courts. It enhanced the frequency of eligibility checks. Currently, you are checked once a year. They're talking about quarterly checks and maybe even biannual checks. So Medicaid is going to increase a person's right to be covered under Medicaid more frequently. Services that are at clinics that provide abortions, not covered, or any of those contraceptive issues. Okay? And it tightens rules for payments to the state. It says that one of the things, Medicaid is only going to be available for legal citizens. So it blocks lawful immigrants that have a green card. You have to have it for 5 years in order to be eligible for Medicaid. Asylum seekers who are legally here, not covered, not allowed to enroll in Medicaid. And like I said, there's a 5-year grant wait period on your green card. So it's trying to wean off and make Medicaid only available for legal long-term residents of the United States. So that's a big deal, the Medicaid issue. Number 2 issue in the healthcare change is SNAP. And that's the supplemental nutritional program that provides under, they call it food stamps. Okay? There's a couple issues of SNAP. One that they don't talk about much in the media. Under SNAP, they, again, increased the work requirement. In order to be eligible for SNAP, if you're between the ages of 18 and now 64, not 54, you have to work 80 hours a month in order to be eligible for food stamps. Okay? They reduced the federal nutrition funding, which goes to a lot of food banks, by $186 billion over a 6-year period, 2025 to 2031. And they shifted cost sharing to the states from 50% to 75%. Currently, states have to pay 50% for the SNAP benefits they're receiving. Next year, they're going to have to pay 75%. So they're pushing the burden of SNAP funding back to the states. And there was this thing called the Thrifty Food Plan, which is the measurement they used to determine SNAP benefits. They eliminated it. No more updates. So a lot of the agencies, especially Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, who have to administer SNAP benefits and figure out who's eligible, who's not eligible, and how much they get, guess what? The metric used to determine those SNAP benefits has disappeared. So it's going to take a lot of work and effort on behalf of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to determine that. It also limits the access to SNAP to only legal, same thing as Medicaid. No, you have to have a green card for 5 years, no asylum seekers, no incarcerated people. This was a big sticking point in the argument. Incarcerated people who are being released aren't eligible now for SNAP benefits. Okay? Think about where they go home to when they get released. They don't have a welcoming home most of the time. SNAP benefits allow them to at least not to be hungry. Those are no longer available. So in Michigan, we have 1.4 million people that rely on SNAP. That's 1 out of 7. That's 39,000 veterans, 225,000 seniors, and 500,000 children. And so they're talking about, same thing with SNAP, having everybody reapply for SNAP, which means some won't. Some people won't reapply. And so people will fall off that wagon. During the government shutdown, there was panic in October, especially from the Human Service Agency. People that depended on SNAP, and that $700,000 a month comes into Alpena County in SNAP benefits. Not just the people receiving those benefits, but grocery stores. You know, Warren Richter, the manager of Meyer, sits on my board. He said it's significant. It's a significant downturn in our revenue because we have a lot of food stamp customers. So not only were individuals scrambling, and the food pantries in our area were just being depleted because people weren't getting their payments. They weren't getting food stamps. The November ones weren't issued for about a month. There was a huge rush on food pantries and those other entities that provide food. And unfortunately for Alpena, the one place that was providing daily meals, the Friendship Room, had a fire. It's still closed. Luckily, Trinity Episcopal opened so that they could continue to support the community by offering daily services. But the meal count went from about 110 daily down to 50 when they went to Trinity. That's because we know people didn't go there, didn't know about it. So SNAP is a big issue. Like I said, $700,000 in just SNAP benefits comes into Alpena County alone every month. Now, if SNAP isn't renewed, they renewed it for 1 year, and you can bet this whole argument is going to go again starting next year. But here's the issue they don't talk about: error rates, SNAP error rates. The federal government initiated a 2-year rolling average of error rates. So you have to, as a state, determine how many eligible people didn't get benefits and how many uneligible people got benefits, and you have an error rate. So the government instituted your error rate under 6%, you're good to go. There's only 5 states with an error rate under 6%. And if you think about those states, you look at the names of the states, they're states that don't give out food benefits. That's why it's under 6%. Mississippi, Louisiana. It's not states, it's states where there's low income people, but they just don't distribute food stamps. So their error rate is low. Michigan's error rate is 9.25%. That's about 7% of people receiving benefits that aren't eligible to receive benefits, and about 2.5% people that should be receiving benefits that aren't receiving benefits or didn't receive benefits. So they get audited. The federal government audits the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. They go in and audit.
Identify something that benefits, but isn't paid enough.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So, and I know I deal with MDHSS people frequently, and they're worried because it is costly to audit the program, particularly if they're requiring it on a quarterly basis. And it can be because I'm not verifying my income, or my income is not correct. I'm not verifying my dependents. So there's all these reasons that you go back and you have to determine all these metrics to qualify. Then you have to go back and verify those that being provided. So, talk a little bit about the error rate. If it's for Michigan right now, if our 2-year moving average doesn't change and it stays at 9.25%, we have to pay a penalty to the federal government of $320 million. $320 million. If it's below, it's between 6% and 9.2%, it's $120 million. But if you're over 9%, it's $320 million. Think about the hit to Michigan's budget. What that means, some services somewhere are going to go away because we're not following through in administering SNAP benefits efficiently. And that's a big thing that I reached out to the executive director of Michigan Association United Ways. She put out an email about the government changes when the budget got renewed. And she put in there, I'm more afraid of the error rate. So I emailed back, error rate? What are you talking about? She said, I need to call you to explain this. It took a half hour to walk through all the explanation and it's significant. If we do not lower our error rate for administering SNAP benefits, it could have a significant tax impact on our state's budget.
No, they're just trying to make more accountability.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, they'll tell you it's, waste, fraud, and abuse. That's what they're trying to eliminate, waste, fraud, and abuse. But you have to be careful what you throw in that bucket as waste, fraud, and abuse. I agree. I mean, you look at DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, that was headed by Musk. He claims that, they saved the government in Michigan alone, they claim $635 million in savings by abandoning, not renewing leases on buildings that weren't being used, reducing the federal workforce the federal workforce has been reduced by tens of thousands of people. I have a cousin that was a civil engineer, worked for the state, for the government. And after that happened, we were at a wedding this summer, and I said, when these buyouts came, and I said, so how'd this affect you? He said, well, it didn't. I took the buyout. He said, Joe, and he isn't a conservative, a very liberal person. He said, I see the waste and fraud, the waste and abuse in my own department. And I figured I'm getting out or I'm going to get cut if they come through and really audit what we're doing. And he said, so I'm doing the same thing, but I'm working for a private contractor. But he took the buyout. So that's one of the first things Trump did in his executive orders to get rid of civil servants. And tens of thousands, 100,000s of people left federal employment. They either took the buyout or they quit and left. So the federal workforce under DOGE has shrunk. Right? But on the flip side, you get all these experienced, smart people are gone. And so now you're left with not so experienced and not so smart and efficient people that are left because the good people left. And now you have, remember, all probationary employees under the government, gone. Your employment was eliminated immediately in January of 2024. So those are some of the things I wanted to talk about. Now I want to talk a little bit about impact in our state that I feel locally, that you might feel locally. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, estimates that this bill, the OBBA, will add $3.3 trillion to the federal deficit by 2034. $3.3 trillion. Currently, our debt to income level in our country, let's take what we owe based on our GDP, it's 117%. By 2034, it's going to be 124%. I worked in banking long enough to know that when somebody comes in and wants to borrow money, the first thing we ask, what's your loan to debt ratio? If it's 30% or lower, you're probably good to go. If it's 30 to 40%, it's probably questionable. If it's over 40%, I would never give you money because you're probably not going to be able to pay it back. But you look at the federal government, our debt to income ratio is 117%. And you know from hearing me in the past, I am a huge advocate of reducing our deficit. So that scares me a little bit, especially from what the CBO did. One of the other things, I'm going to pass this out, some of the things you don't often hear about is, as you know, one of the things that Trump did was he cut back on FEMA. They want to weaken it and they want to reduce government role in any disaster relief. So United Way has been the administrator of something called the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, which is funded under FEMA. Every year, Congress appropriates a certain amount of money to FEMA to be distributed through the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. It's run by a national board, which includes the United Way, the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and they then allocate those funds to every county in the country. And those countries then are administered by a local board to release those funds to nonprofit organizations that are providing food assistance. It can be served meals or grocery, shelter, funding for mass shelters, or hotels or hotel vouchers, such as Hope Shores Alliance, the Sunrise Mission, NIMSCA, and rent and utility assistance. They can help with rent, so there's no eviction, transportation costs that are associated with getting people to food or shelter, and then certain supplies and equipment. If I owned a food pantry and we were a nonprofit, I could apply for funding for refrigeration so I could have meat and dairy available in my food pantry. So those are the way that the funds can be used. How are they distributed? Every year there's an allocation to the county, and you can see, I give you a chart. This has been around since 1983, actually. The first funding came in 1984. And you can see, I've listed the funding for because we administer Alpena, Alcona, Montmorency County funding. In January of 2024, January 1st, Alpena was allocated $14,924 to be distributed. What we do is run an ad in the paper. Funds are available if you're, providing food or shelter, and you're a nonprofit, you can apply for the funds. Then we have a local board that makes a determination who gets those funds. From the 14,924, I think 5,000 went to the Salvation Army for food. 5,000 went to Sunrise Mission for their shelter provisions. And then the balance went to Hope Shores Alliance because they provide shelter for sexually abused victims. Alcona was allocated 3,393 and Montmorency was allocated 5,076. You say, gee, why are they so small when their needs are probably bigger than Alpena's? It's all determined based on your poverty levels and your unemployment. And those two counties never hit the benchmarks to get a direct allocation. So those allocations have to be made by a statewide committee. There are so many counties in Michigan, the statewide committee then allocates funds. They allocated the funds, we never received them. Because in the middle of January, the Trump administration put a freeze on all FEMA funding. So there hasn't been a 2025 allocation. And you can see going back where the amount of these allocations were. You look at the ARPAR, that was an additional one because of the pandemic, as was the CARES. Those were separate in years when there was greater need created by the pandemic. Those funds have all been distributed in our county to provide for emergency food, emergency shelter, gone. FEMA froze all of their funding. I can go to my website, my EFSP website, put in my password, and it comes up blank. So whether it will be restored or not, I don't know. But these are little things that occur that we often don't hear about. MSU. I'm a graduate from Michigan State University. If you know, one of the things that Trump did in his executive orders was to eliminate DEI. Any institution that was promoting, programming, language that referred to diversity, equity, and inclusion, funding was cut. Michigan State lost $87 million in grants and research projects because of DEI. Our Michigan Department of Health and Human Services lost $400 million in funding, and that goes to providing programming for low-income people in our community. Our 12 federal tribal recognized tribes authorities in Michigan, funding was cut $12 million. Okay. I talked about the Form F. That's just an interesting thing. If you get a chance, I encourage you to go look at it, see how you fare. And the goal for 2026 is to reshape the federal program on housing assistance. NEMSCA is our probably biggest provider here in our local area, in a 15 county region, on providing housing for homeless and providing access to housing for homeless people or people just in transition. Not all people are homeless, quote, living under the bridge, but there's people in transition, people that come to Alpena for surgery and they're be released, they have nowhere to go. They don't have transportation costs to get back to their home from where they came from. Those are some of the issues. We talk about, well, they're temporarily homeless. How do we give them a hotel voucher, motel voucher until we can get them back to home? I think my Michigan has actually started a program or is contemplating starting a program they call Return to Home. how do we get private funding to help these people that are in transition return to home, or people that are incarcerated? You know, our agency has been lucky. We have been the recipient of thousands of pair of brand new shoes and boots from Merrill. And so we've been able to distribute these wherever the need is. And I talked to our officer at our college board meetings, Mike, and I said, "Sure, if you have any need for this." He said, "Are you kidding me? Of course we do. We get prisoners come in and have no shoes. We have prisoners that get released. They have no shoes. You see them walking down M32 with socks." I said, so people in incarceration are transitional people. They may not, quote, be truly homeless, but they're in transition. And so the idea is, how do we help those people? Trump wants to reduce the housing assistance. Data shows that through NIMSCA and MDHSS, there's about 7,000 Michigan families that would be dramatically impacted by that. Another big thing, tariffs. Whether you agree on tariffs or don't agree with tariffs, here's the fact. General Motors estimates that the tariffs that they're dealing with, they sent a notice to their shareholders that in 2025, they expect a $5 billion loss because of tariffs. $5 billion. So anticipate that. Our governor has tried to work with President Trump to say these tariffs are dramatically impacting the automobile industry, particularly in Michigan. Farmers in Michigan were significantly hurt. Just Michigan farmers alone lost $167 million in export product because of tariffs. It wasn't until after the fact that China agreed to finally take some soybeans, but not enough. So our local farmers are losing money because of the tariffs. Immigration. Michigan is, whether you like it or not, a border state. We have 5 areas of points of entry in Michigan, which gives the government, under the unique presidential powers, to use ICE to control immigration in Michigan. ICE arrests in Michigan in 2025 went up 230%. Our detention, ICE detention currently went up to 68,422, and 1,700 of those are detained here in Michigan. They took a vacated prison down in southern Michigan, and it's become an ICE detention facility. Student visas have been revoked. It's affected University of Michigan, Central, Saginaw Valley, and Grand Valley State Colleges. They had students actively enrolled. Their visas were revoked, and they weren't able to enroll. The fee for H-1B visas, which are, you're a highly skilled, qualified person, we want you to come to Michigan, mainly in Michigan, used by the automobile countries to bring in engineers. The fee went up to $100,000 per visa. Interesting story. Last weekend, I had the opportunity to go see a relative of mine play professional hockey in Hamilton, Ontario. Emma Gentry is on the Toronto Scepters. And so they had a game scheduled in Hamilton. So we went there for 4 days, had a nice weekend. And so we're in this restaurant bar, and I got talking to this band that was playing that was really, really good. And my daughter was with us, and she said, "Man, we bring these people to Alpena. They are so good. It's the perfect kind of music, blah, blah, blah." So she went over during the break, got their card, and he said, "Would you be interested?" No. He says, "It's $1,500 per member to get a visa to come play in Michigan. Then we don't know if we're going to be able to get back." I said, "Really?" He says, we have stopped all of our engagements in the United States." And, and I was really feeling bad going over there because I thought, oh man, I don't want them to know I'm American, start wearing Canadian clothing or something, identify yourself. And I had on my Toronto Scepter hat. And anyway, I found the people not angry with us. They felt sorry for us. Everybody we talked to, we feel sorry for you. We feel sorry for you. It kind of took me a while for that to sink in. And then, of course, then they share, we have the same problem you do. So they didn't like Pierre Thoreau, obviously, a lot of them. But anyway, the sympathy was for the citizens and for what's happening. And of course, that was just during the Venezuelan issues. But yeah, interesting. But here's musicians, and I bartend at the eAects occasionally, and I know we've had Canadian bands in before President Trump was president, numerous ones, and not anymore because it's too costly to come across the border, and then they don't know if they're going to get back. And that's sad because we are a border state. Another piece of impact, student loans. Okay, during the pandemic, loan payments were put on hold. You didn't have to make your loan payments if you had student loans. In Michigan alone, there's 1.3 million in existing student debt. No, student loan borrowers. There's 1.3 million student loan borrowers in Michigan, and there's $53.2 billion in debt. And 185,000 are now in default. That equals $4 billion. And so no more loan forgiveness. We're not going to forgive them. You got to start paying back. And if you don't start paying back, we're going to sequester your wages. Right? So whether you agree with that or not, that's just the fact. The biggest piece, the other big piece under student loan is this moniker of what is a professional. And I don't know if you've read anything about this, but there's a number of degrees now that require advanced training. They are no longer considered professionals, nursing, healthcare providers, certain healthcare providers, if you're not a medical doctor, some dentists, all these degrees that require physical therapists. Physical therapist today, you have to have a PhD to be a physical therapist. Very expensive. You're talking 6 years of education to just get to be certified. No longer considered a professional. What's that do? Restricts the amount of money that you can borrow significantly. Like down to, those are considered graduate degrees. They're not professionals. So that change really, really will impact a future where there's significant shortages in nurses, shortages in healthcare providers, in PTs. So now you're not going to be able to see as many people go in there because they won't be able to borrow the money because they're loan restricted, because they're not professionals. There's a huge outcry about this whole issue. It will restrict entry into many, many programs. What else? Oh, Great Start Collaborative. In the Michigan budget, when it got passed, funding for the Great Start Collaborative was eliminated. And I'm not sure you're aware of what Great Start Collaborative is. We're the fiduciary for the Great Start Collaborative in Sheboygan, Presque Isle, and Otsego County. AMA ESD housed the Great Start Collaborative for Alpena, Alcona, and Montmorency County. Great Start Collaborative people, they help families with young children to receive services that they may not be aware of. They do home visits. They work with low-income people. They provide for parent education, early literary support. I know one of the programs we support from Great Start Collaborative was Shoepalooza. They provide all these low-income kids to make sure they have shoes for gym class in school. And they connect families with all this early childhood resources. That funding is gone. Some of them are making it through the end of this school year from private funding sources, and some just close their door like the one in Sheboygan, Otsego, and Presque Isle County. We partner with them as their fiduciary. We did the Project Connects in Onaway and Rogers City, the Project Connects in Sheboygan, Project Connects in Otsego County. Those are a day where you come in, you get food, they order food truck, you get services, you need a haircut, you want a dental exam, you need an eye exam. All these services are available one day, no cost, come in to anybody. It's a wonderful program. Alpena used to do, United Way used to sponsor it, started it, but it became too big for us. So now it's run through Early Head Start and Head Start programs because they're dealing primarily with a lot of low-income people. Project Connects was held at the fairgrounds, and believe me, I gave away 600 pair of shoes to people. That was our part. Let's make them available and get them out to people. The other part of the Michigan budget, I went to bat for Dorothy Pintar. She said, Joe, the budget, before it got approved, does not include money for school success. Now, school success workers, it's a state, they won state awards from the governor again this year for the work that they do. Every school in Alpena, in, let's see, Posen, Atlanta, Lewiston, Hillman, and all the Alcona schools and all the Alpena schools, including Emmanuel Lutheran, have a school success worker. School success workers work with low-income kids that are on the border, in low-income families to make sure that they are doing their homework, they're getting the support they need to be successful. It is a critically important program. It was so successful in our area that John, the superintendent, our former superintendent, who now is the superintendent of TCAPS in Traverse City, introduced school success program in Traverse City. He got private funding to fund it. It is a critical program. My wife worked at the junior high for 12 years and said, without school success, you'll see kids disappear, drop right off the chart. They won't come to school. There'll be delinquency. She said it is critically important because they work with all those kids that are on the edge, on the border, and just need the support to be successful. We work with school success through our Christmas Wish List program. Every September, our success workers get allocated so many names that they're allowed to submit. They go to the parents, what do these kids need? Not toys, underwear, bedding, pillows. It's interesting because this year I saw more requests for bedding and pillows than I ever have. But it's not toys, it's what do they need? Boots, socks, underwear, clothing, shirts. Three things. And then we go out and find donors. We serve 500 kids or 400 kids this year, 401. From all those schools that I know, every success worker got an allocation of maybe 10 names, 20 names. Some of the bigger schools, the higher need schools, got 30 names. We then try to find matches. And then if we can't find matches, we use our resources to make sure that those kids' needs are met. Some parents pick their gifts up, but school success is the critical piece. When Dorothy told me that school success was not going to be funded, I said, then United Way doesn't need to exist because almost everything we do channels through school success because we're focusing on low-income people, people with food insecurity, homeless people that need showers and baths, those kinds of things. I said, and school success is 80% of what we do. They identify because they're doing home visits. They know where the need is, and then we're able to respond based on what they have found out. So we were lucky, and it's not state money. It's federal money that gets allocated to school success through the Department of Education. And so our state legislator at the time, they wanted to eliminate that funding. And that school success funding is like 1.7 million, is just located in our 15 county area in northern Michigan. That is through NIMSCA.
Why does the state want to eliminate it?
Waste, fraud, and abuse. That's exactly the terminology they used in the language. And that's how we wrote the letter supporting it based on this isn't waste, fraud, and abuse. This is success and meeting the needs of a community, and here's all the things that they're doing. But again, you got to be careful. Waste, fraud, and abuse, I'm all for that. What you put in that bucket. It's easy sitting in, huh?
law. Does the governor sign that law?
Yeah. The school success, she signs the budget. So here, which leads me right into where I want to go. Perfect segue. I said 2 days before Christmas, Mike Hall, our House Majority Leader, decided that they were going to reverse $645 million in cuts, which meant these were approved in the budget signed by the governor, but the House Appropriation Committee decided we're not going to appropriate funds for it. 159 million of the funding came from the Make It Michigan Competitive Fund, which promotes economic development. And it was championed by Governor Whitner because it secured federal funding from the CHIPS Act. We're not going to fund that. $18.5 million of funding for eAects Kids. So in October, we were approached to become an advocate and a champion for this program called eAects Kids in Mount Morenci. eAects Kids was a program that started through Michigan State University in Flint. And in Flint, if you're a low-income pregnant person, they will get cash of $1,500 upfront during their pregnancy. Then once the baby's born, they get $500 a month for a minimum of 6 months and up to 12 months to support them so their pregnancy is successful. Their lives aren't upset by all these additional expenses. It's been a program that's been around for, I'm saying, almost 10 years in Flint, extremely successful. And it's, instead of giving them services, give them money. It's monitored by a champion organization who administers the program, identifies the people that qualify, and then provides them the cash and then the follow-up on how those funds are being used. Okay. So that was funded. And the money's been spent in Flint. We're not going to spend it. Even though the eAects Kids in Flint was already spending the money that had been approved, they're not going to get it now because the funding has been denied by the House Appropriation Committee. Some other stuff like the Holocaust Memorial in Farmington Hills, they eliminated that funding. 56,600 provide wigs. This is probably one you read about. They approved this money to provide wigs for cancer patients. Throw that out. It's not doable. So the House isn't going to pay for those. A $2.5 million pilot study to put traffic cameras at in school zones to better address traffic in school zone. Believe me, we could use one at the junior high and the high school. 1.3 million in funding for the Office of Global Michigan, which is attracting foreign investment into Michigan. 1.9 million in grants to symphony orchestras, and $800,000 for a new fire truck in Hamtramck, which they already ordered. You know, it's like a 2-year lead time. You're not getting the money now, even though they ordered it. So it all totaled up to $645 million that Speaker Hall said, this is nonsense. This is wasteful spending. We do not approve it. So just yesterday, our Attorney General filed and issued a great big statement saying it's unconstitutional. House Appropriation Committee cannot deny appropriating funds that have already been approved. So we'll see where that goes. Because Speaker Hall came back and said, well, tough, we'll sue you. We think it's legal. So where this all goes, these are the kinds of issues that they got a grant for it. That's why it's just like the college. We got a grant for student housing. We got money for our solar array, which we're questioning whether that was the grant that we got to put the solar array in to complement our utility tech program. No money, you know, we had the property. It went through a long process. Then you go to pay the bills. You're hoping that the appropriation is coming. Lucky it did come. But if we had dated a year later, it probably would have been cut. But when they order a fire truck, believe me, they're not paying out our tax dollars. They're paying for grants that they get. Yes. They're expensive, $800,000. You know, fire departments don't have that kind of money laying around to write a check for a new fire truck. So a lot of this comes through grants and earmarks, unfortunately. It used to be there was a small window of time when legislatures were not allowed earmarks. Earmarks where a legislature could get money contributed to his district by just an earmark. Every time I drive through the UP and I go into Gladstone, and there's this beautiful expressway off of US 2, I wonder what the heck is going on here? Well, that was the Michigan senator who was there forever, and he was from Gladstone, and he got the money. And they put in this like 3-mile section of interstate highway in the middle of nowhere. But it created jobs and it created this nice infrastructure for the city of Gladstone. If you have a senator or a representative before there were term limits who understands earmarks, they're always going to earmark. Put an earmark, get money for Alpena Community College, get money for the Alpena Harbor project, the Lafarge project. All their harbor improvements came through earmarks, through legislation. Because whether it was Gary Peters or whoever had a tie to Alpena and a tie to what you're doing, then he goes to bat for you to get you your funding. Yeah, a lot of this money comes through appropriations and those kinds of issues. So that's the things I wanted to talk about this morning. There are some good things in the tax bill, believe me, but you can see the direction that we're heading. I got a thing this morning. Like I said, everything changes. The other two things I didn't mention, AmeriCorps. You all look at all the work that's been done on Island Park. Those were AmeriCorps employees. In the summertime, the Boys and Girls Club would get AmeriCorps funding to hire young kids to go make community improvement projects. AmeriCorps has been eliminated. So all that work that was being done and help kids start a professional career life, a working life, and do community projects, that funding's gone. There was a program called the Retired Volunteer Service Program, RVSP, used to be run by NEMSCA. RSVP enlisted retired people to volunteer and paid them, whether it was working in a classroom as a retired volunteer in the classroom, or any other activity. That program is now gone. But it's a volunteer program, but they reimburse you something for gas. Yeah. Now over in Otsego County, they privatized their funding. They didn't go state funding. They have a RSVP program that has probably 60 people doing all kinds of things, and they pay them well because they're services that are needed, whether it's in the schools, whether it's in their shelter. So they pay for, like the shelter has to have 24-hour trained people. RSVP could walk in and pay for those people, so it's not an expense burden on the shelter.
You had to be low income.
Yep.
To even
qualify. Yeah. So, but that's gone. The other thing that's happened is, particularly from a nonprofit standpoint, we depend on a lot of data. There's a thing called Civic Health Index that every 2 years all this data was out there about foundations, where they got their funding, how many volunteer hours they're doing, all these metrics to measure what you need to be doing and what you need to be doing to be successful. That's all gone. Costs too much to deliver that. So we have foundations that are kind of scrambling. We used to get census data on hunger that would identify the food insecurity needs in your community through the Census Bureau. That's gone. Too expensive to provide. There's IRS foundation data. I know we have to file a 990 every year, and that 990 is very detailed on how many volunteer hours, how many in-kind donations, how many cash donations every year. It's our accounting statement. That data is uploaded by the IRS and is available for everybody to go look at. It's not available anymore. You can go to the IRS website, punch in foundation. You want to see where how much money was donated through the Community Foundation, Northeast Michigan. Can't find it. Okay. All that data is gone. But the biggest thing is this DEI, the elimination of diversity, equity, and income, or inclusion. Administration has, this came out this morning, by the way. The administration has advised Head Start providers to avoid dozens of terms in federal grant applications, including race, belonging, pregnant people. In Wisconsin, the Head Start director received a list of 200 words to cut. They include Black, Native American, disability, and women. So DEI is, we want to eliminate DEI, and the big deal is, the other thing is climate change. You know, they want to quit funding the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, because they feel NOAA is the driver of all this climate change rhetoric. They've opened the areas to drilling. The Arctic wilderness areas are now open for gas and oil drilling. So they want to eliminate climate change from everything. Okay? You saw the tax credits for electric cars, gone. Tax credits for putting in a hookup for electric vehicles in your house, gone. All this stuff. That's why Ford and GM have abandoned their electric car manufacturing pursuits, because of the current administration programs. We're not supporting electric. We're not supporting wind farms. We're not supporting solar. I have a close friend whose son works on a wind farm off of the East Coast, and it's 80% done, completed, and he's doing all the underwater testing for anything that's under there, animals and the impact stuff. And he said, we got called off. There it sits, 80% done, but there's no more money because we're not promoting wind farm stuff anymore. So these are issues that are in the mainstream today. And if you want to know what more is coming down the pike, I suggest you read 2025. Yes.
Well, you talk about deficits, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are, if there's not a lot of negativity toward it as a deficit. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. So what could be cut to help deflect all this debt that the country's going to have?
I think we need to increase the tax rate for a while. I remember we had a governor in Michigan when the state government was bankrupt, Jim Blanchard, and he raised taxes. But he also said, we need to do this because we're bankrupt. Our bond rating in Michigan went in the toilet. You couldn't even borrow money at a reasonable rate. And he did. He raised taxes. And they were like 6% at that time. But the minute the budget got resolved, he lowered taxes. I think when you're in something like that, you have to find a way, not just to eliminate expenses, but to increase revenue. Nobody wants to address the Social Security and Medicare when that funding's going to go out. And I tell people, well, Social Security, you know why they picked 62 as retirement age? The average age a person was living was 59 when it was implemented. It was never meant to be a supplementary income program. It was meant to be a place to catch people who were in trouble, not a secondary income program. And so you need to look at increase in tax rates. You need to look at raising the eligibility age. Those are hard issues. And every politician is working to get rehired or reelected. And those are issues that you start talking about them, you're not going to get reelected. I would be willing, and I can't really afford it that well, to pay more taxes if I knew there was a long-range picture of when this would right itself and those taxes would be lowered.
Joe, and every 20 years or so, government needs to look within itself, tear itself down, and look at what programs we have. Because so many are duplications, some become very inefficient. So rather than upping taxes and maintaining all these programs sound wonderful. And we need to feed people, we need to take care of them. But people need to learn how to take care of themselves. And not always expect that the government's going to provide a program that's going to meet my needs. I think government has just gone the other way.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
Instead of raising taxes, let's look how we can cut inefficiency and duplication.
I agree with you 100%. Working in the nonprofit sector, I see all kinds of duplication. A lot of it. And it isn't coming from private sources. You know what?
Because it's them feel better about themselves.
Mhm.
And we avoid a lot of that.
Along with that, I think the minimum wage needs to be raised so that people can actually make a living. Right now with the minimum wage, it's difficult for people to be able to afford housing, food, the programs, the welfare programs allow a certain amount for your electricity, but they don't even allow enough to cover electricity bill. So you have all these programs that are established, but if you actually give the people a way to make a living, then they don't need all the programs.
And learn to manage their own lives.
Yeah.
Well, there's legislation and then there's some advocates that talk about a reverse income tax. We eliminate all programs and we just give every taxpayer an annual stipend, whether it's $25,000 or $30,000, and you're on your own when we eliminate all these federal programs. That has been proposed. I'm not so sure I would disagree with some of that. You could eliminate an awful lot of duplication and maybe services that are superfluous and not really necessary. It would go away. And I said, this
national debt keeps piling up. It's got to come from somewhere. It's got to get paid off. And is it going to go on our children and our grandchildren?
it's whoever's borrowing the government money, and it's primarily not Americans. Yeah, or it's not Americans. It's, most of its bondholders are Chinese. They have a bigger stake in our government than you can imagine financially.
So is there either a federal or a state definition of employment? At one point, it was working 1 hour per week, you were employed. That's pretty minimal.
That's the thing about the 80 hours of work. That's what Nestle has filed suit, define what 80 hours of work includes. Because somewhere in there it says volunteer work is included. So if I'm Medicaid or if I'm drawing SNAP benefits, then I could be volunteering. And how do we determine what volunteer hours really qualify? That's not easy to do. And so they've asked for definitions on it. There's a lot of gray areas still to be determined. A lot.
What's our biggest line item in the budget? Thanks.
Yeah.
Are they audited?
No.
Is there any duplication services? Probably.
The defense,
I mean, you didn't mention that.
the portion of the budget that went to defense was increased significantly. Yep. No. Border control is the other one. You look at the money that was allocated to our border control and immigration, and I don't disagree at all with, I might disagree with the methodology, but I don't disagree with who's legally here and who should be legally here. And in fact, I just read a note and I want to verify it that President Obama deported more people than Trump has in his first year. In his first year, President Obama deported more people than President Trump. So we get all up in air about deportation, but if it's legitimate, it's legitimate.
Can you believe it? I have gotten a feeling of hopelessness. Is it real or is it real? You know, I don't mean to deny that, but then just because someone said it, you know, it's got to be, back it up, show something for it.
So the FDC recently, the director of the FDC eliminated the clause that if you put misinformation on air or on the airwave or on the internet, you do not have to file a thing when it's formed to be called this misinformation. You do not have to go back and say, oh, this was misinformation. So you can post it with no consequences. Yeah, they do. Yeah.
It has the numbers, and he was telling me the amount of illegal immigrants in the state of Michigan. I can't remember the exact number, but it was a horrendous amount. And I think anybody in our country illegally should first off not receive benefits, and then second off should be should be removed from the country and to go legal. You know, as long as they're here legal, then.
I just feel like both sides have dug in their heels. I feel like you are very well networked in our community and you know your data. How has your conversation evolved? Have you noticed any growth as far as communication?
Well, it's interesting because take the Great Start Collaborative that, you know, they eliminated the funding for that. There hasn't been, even from the administrators of that, they said, no, you know, there's other programs that probably are doing the same kind of things that can fill in the gaps. You know, the big program they had, the Trump-o-nomics, it's already been taken over by somebody else. I think you'll see a switch from government supported to private supported. I feel that it's possible and doable. I think the foundation is stepping up in certain areas to fill the gaps that maybe government shouldn't be filling. I look at the ice storm. FEMA money wasn't available, nothing was available, and everybody knows there was a lot of distress that went on. People needed gas, people needed energy sources. Community Foundation opened their Urgent Needs Fund, and that's all private money. And that goes to meet the needs of a community. And it did a darn good job. And it's still continuing to do a darn good job. So my feeling is that at least in our community, we are a generous community. And people are people. I don't think our community is as divided as our country. I just don't believe it. Just from what the people I talk to and work with. And it's kind of like we live in this small little bubble up here. And it really is, it's a generous community. And I think if true need is there, the community will take care of it. I believe that.
You know, I was a board member from Prescott, former board member told me that they budget $250,000 for emergency. They had 100 million.
100 million.
Where do we get? How do we get?
Well, that's where
100 million.
yeah.
That's supposed to be
FEMA, but they didn't. I know it.
So everybody should we should just spread that all through the customers then.
Well,
what we're saying, I guess. if we're
that's
saying
an,
that.
I would say that's a kind of an anomaly. That there needs to be some way for, same thing with a hurricane or, yeah,
How many FEMA events do we have in Northeast Michigan?
maybe two. Well, we had,
How many?
yeah, we had a tornado.
Thinking maybe 2 or 3 in the 20-some years I've up.
Yeah.
And they're nothing like 100 millions.
Right. Yeah, they had to replace every telephone pole.
Some rain event that caused 8 inches of rain and washed out a bunch of bridges and culverts and stuff like that. I can remember stuff like that, but this is just,
But
and there's nobody cares. How do you get from 250,000 to 100 million?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Do they,
So
they must have, they must have some kind of private insurance that helps somewhat in that. It's like me, if my house burned down, I would lean on my insurer to help me rebuild. That's an industry, that's a private industry. But yeah, do I think FEMA should exist? Yeah. Do I think it probably needs to be managed better?
just don't go to
Well, right, and they did, they froze it, so,
you know. That's awesome.
yeah. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you for your time and attention.